Hello everyone and welcome back to the Beyond the Big Six YouTube channel, and today we're going to talk about Sunderland, which is my team, but I'm going to put in neutral, or as neutral a hat as I can on. Obviously I'm aware I've got Sunderland stuff in the room, but a lot of people have been talking about Sunderland as a potential relegation threatened side, and I thought, let's look into it. Let's look into it and see whether or not people are correct in thinking that. So the reason why Sunderland are being tipped largely is because underlying data last season suggested that Sunderland vastly overperformed. There is also the fact that Sunderland qualified for Europe last season, which means they've got Europa League games, which if they have a decent run could mean anywhere from 8 games if they just play the group games, all the way up to like 17 if they won the thing. So Sunderland could potentially be playing 50 plus games next season, not even counting what they do in the Carabao Cup and the FA Cup, which has led to a lot of people saying, well, do you know what? Why wouldn't they struggle? Was year one at Sunderland not a fluke? Was it all the stars aligning? Did Sunderland get very, very lucky? And will it all come tumbling down in the second season? Second season syndrome's been talked about a lot. And before we dive into the video properly, I'm going to debunk second season syndrome. We've done videos about this on the channel. Second season syndrome is barely a thing. It normally only affects clubs that either A, didn't recruit particularly much in the first season, B, just stayed up by the skin of the teeth in the first season and got relegated in the second season, or C, had something cataclysmic happen in that period. So, for example, Sheffield United, they had COVID hit and they lost Bramall Lane as like one of the main ways they were picking up points. So, there are reasons why those teams go down. And look, second season syndrome, it just doesn't happen that much. I think it's like somewhere in the region of 10% of teams in the second season get relegated. So, yeah, I'm not having that. I think Sunderland fans, Leeds fans, ignore second season syndrome as a thing. But I do think there are things and reasons why people are tipping Sunderland to go down. A lot of it, I think, is laziness within punditry. A lot of it is hope that one of the newly promoted teams can survive, and looking at Sunderland as, well, you know, they just came up and they had a really good first season, but now they've got all these added games. Is the pressure on the team going to tell? So we're going to look into that in this video and decide whether or not Sunderland could well be a team under threat. So if we look at the way that the squad is comprised, and look, one of the reasons why people are a little bit worried about Sunderland, and I've seen this, is the lack of transfer business this summer. Sunderland so far, at the time of recording this video, have signed one player, which is a free transfer. Thomas Meunier came in from Lille. He is a veteran fullback who's going to go in there, replace essentially Lucharel Hertrauda, who was on loan last season, who has since left. So Meunier comes in. That is all Sunderland have done. They've got rid of Eliza Mayenda. They've got rid of Anthony Patterson as well. They've also lost Dennis Serkin, Dan Neil, Arthur Masuaku, a few other sort of barely fringe players at that. So Sunderland have brought money in. And something I have seen on the channel is people saying Sunderland overspent last summer, which therefore means they can't spend this summer. And that is categorically not true. Sunderland do have budget to spend. Sunderland have been trying to spend money this summer. They've had offers of around 35 million euros rejected for Dejan Batali. They've had offers up to 40 million rejected for Jenny Katamo. So the suggestion would at least be that they've got about 70 million quid to spend at an absolute minimum. But they've also brought in 35 million on top of that as well. So Sunderland definitely do have money to spend. They've also shed a lot of money off their wage bill as well this summer. They were carrying quite a lot of fat within the squad last season, and a lot of that has been moved on. So there definitely is no financial problems at Sunderland. There's no worries about SCR or PSR or whatnot. Yes, though, there is a difference with when you're in Europe with SCR. So Sunderland can only spend 70% of their football-related revenues on football matters, and that obviously can have big implications, and it does mean Sunderland can't spend as much as some of their Premier League rivals. But again, Sunderland came up to the Premier League at a really low cost base. They did spend a lot of money last summer, but that still only brought them up sort of into the bottom 6 of Premier League wage spends and stuff. So they came from such a low base. Sunderland actually got promoted in profit, which is pretty remarkable, all things considered. They sold over £50 million worth of players last summer. They've sold already around £35 million worth of players this summer. So Sunderland have got no worries when it comes to SER, PSR and all that sort of good stuff. Now, that being said, Sunderland are very frugal in the transfer market. If you look at the business they did last summer, they didn't really overspend on anyone. And in fact, they actually made a lot of business, which made other Premier League teams scratch their heads. You're looking at Nori Mukiele came in for 10 million, Omar Alderete for 10 million, Robin Roofs came in for 10 million. That's 30 million spent there on 3 players that have been unbelievable for Sunderland. So there has been like very prudent signings. They've also got players that they carried from the Championship: Trey Hume, Dan Ballard, Luke O'Nien, Chris Rigg. Obviously, Enzo Lefebvre was in the Championship with them, Wilson Isidore as well. So they've carried quite a lot of those Championship players who've translated quite well to the Premier League as well. But the other factor with the summer business with Sunderland is the status of their squad. And Sunderland, even though they sign a lot of young players, they do not have much wiggle room when it comes to non-homegrown players, which in Europe is a big issue, because in Europe you can have 17 homegrown players. You can then have 4 players on top of that who are homegrown within the nation. So that would be players, for example, like Luke O'Nien, who was brought up in the English football system but not at Sunderland. And then you're allowed 4 homegrown club players, which currently Sunderland have 0. So they are already operating on essentially a -4. They do have Chris Rigg, who is a homegrown club player, but he does not need to be registered because he's under the age of 21. So what that essentially means is that right now Sunderland have got 16 non-homegrown players in their squad, which means they can only add 1 non-homegrown player before they walk into registration issues. Now, it is possible that Sunderland do sort of not register certain players, so they could, for example, not register second choice goalkeeper Melker Elborg and instead register Simon Moore for Europe, which would free up an additional spot. There are also fringe players that they could look at and not registered. So for example, could they look at Jocelyn Tarby, who they brought in last January for like 3 million quid, and go, do you know what, we are not going to register you for Europe, which would also free up another spot, and he's just a fringe player. So it's possible that Sunderland could free up 2 or 3 spots on top of where they are right now, but essentially they are in a little bit of a squeeze when it comes to those registration numbers, and that is causing a lot of the issues within Sunderland's recruitment, because they are trying to sign in players from abroad, but they have to make sure they're the right ones because they don't want to waste a spot on them. Now, the other thing thrown at Sunderland is the big question of the Europa League, and is this team prepared for Europe? And I think on the face of it, people would look at a newly promoted team getting into Europe and say, wow, you know, they are not going to be prepared for that. If you think about Ipswich, when they did it like 25 years ago, they were not prepared to be in Europe the next season. They end up getting relegated. Now, I think there are massive differences between Sunderland and Ipswich in that era. Huge differences. And I think the main one is that Sunderland have got a squad full of players used to playing in Europe. So I'll go through now all the players that have severe experience of playing top division football and Europe. So you've got in there Thomas Meunier. He has played all his career top level football with European football. Nordi Mukiele, he has as well. You've also got in there Ronaldo, who's been at Atletico Madrid. He has that. Granit Xhaka, of course, has done it his whole career. We've also got Noah Siddiqui, who has done it when he was at Union SG. You've got Enzo Lefebvre, who's played European football and top division football. Habib Diarra has done it. You've also got Brian Brobby, who has done it throughout his career when he was at Ajax. Chemson Talby as well has also played European football and top division football. So this squad is littered with players that have got that European level experience. So I think when people think about Sunderland as a newly promoted team that, you know, fought its way up and got into Europe, they forget that Sunderland spent lots of money last summer bringing in a lot of players who have a lot of European experience. That is a market that Sunderland targeted. They wanted to bring in players that had top level experience in Europe, and that meant when they did sort of surprise everyone and get into Europe, they would have a pretty decent chance with this squad of having a good run in it. So I think, for me, the concern about Sunderland being in Europe is less to do with the players not being used to it, but probably more to do with whether or not they pick up a lot of injuries. And I think if you look at the Sunderland squad, they have quite a few players that if they lost to injury, they would be in big, big trouble. And no more so than Granit Xhaka. Now, Xhaka is 34 next month. And if Granit Xhaka shows any signs of slowing down or picks up injuries, Sunderland are going to have a big problem there, because he is the most important player. He's not the best player. That would go to Enzo Lefebvre, but he is the most important player, and losing him would be a massive blow. Can Sunderland play 50-plus games with Granit Xhaka in the team next season? I am not 100% sure at his age. He has done it in the past. He's done it, you know, only a couple of years ago when he was at Bayer Leverkusen, but I think it's a big ask for a player like him who covers so much ground to play 50-plus games and not pick up injuries as well. He plays international football on top of that. So I have concerns with that. I also think the squad rotation is going to be very, very important for Sunderland. They're going to have to prioritise certain games. I would guess that in the first half of the season, Sunderland are going to prioritise the Premier League. They will probably believe that they can get through the Europa League group stages without playing necessarily their strongest team. But once we hit the second half of the season, I think Sunderland will flip that, and I think Sunderland will target Europe in the second half of the season. But that relies on Sunderland having a pretty decent start to the Premier League campaign. If Sunderland are sat in December 18th, 17th in the Premier League and in relegation trouble, then the priority will move to be in the Premier League. I've got no doubt about that. But if Sunderland are sat like they were this past season with 30 points roughly at Christmas time, Sunderland will just shift their focus to the Europa League and try and see what they can do in that competition. But I think Sunderland are pretty smart in knowing that, they know where their bread is buttered. They do not want to risk everything by going for the Europa League and risk their Premier League status. But there are issues with this Sunderland team, and the depth is an issue. The fact that they've made no transfer business other than one free transfer so far is an issue. I can see why people are looking at Sunderland and questioning it. The underlying data last season, which to be honest, I think is a little bit misleading. Sunderland last season did give away quite a substantial amount of XG, but actually a lot of that comes from block shots. Sunderland didn't give away a ton of clear-cut chances. It was more allowing the opposition to take less lower quality chances, but allowing them to take more of them, but protecting the penalty box. If anyone watched Sunderland last season, they would probably see a team that was sitting in, letting the opposition have possession, letting the opposition have the ball in and around the box, but also frustrating them and making them resort to long-range shots or lower quality chances. That's what Sunderland did really well last season, and I don't think that particularly translates well to XG. Now, the other thing is that as the season wore on and Sunderland got to the last 10 games or so of the Premier League campaign, Sunderland actually ended the season really well. They won 4 of their last 8 games. They only lost 2 of the last 8 in there as well. They won the XG battle, I think, in the final 8 games of the season. They won that. So it began to turn a little bit for Sunderland as they confirmed their Premier League status and they began to become a little bit more free and a little bit more open. But I think Sunderland will probably go into this campaign still playing that pretty strong defensive style football whereby they try not to give the opposition much rope to run to create tons of high quality chances. Sunderland will allow the opposition to have the ball. I suspect most games they'll probably have less than 45% of the ball, but that is the way that they like it. They like doing that. They like being quite good on the counter attack. Now, the other thing with Sunderland to be positive going into the new campaign is that they've got a lot of stability. Reggie Sabrice is now entering his 3rd campaign, and that is huge. He has proven himself to be a pretty astute manager in the Premier League. They've also got stability within their squad. They haven't sold a big player this summer. A lot of people expected either a Robin Roofs or a Noah Siddiqui to go. Obviously, there was a report of the Granit Xhaka going to Chelsea potentially. And Sunderland have been able to stave off all that interest. Brian Brobby as well was another player linked away. And when Brian Brobby came in last summer, he didn't have a pre-season. It took him till about November to really get going in the Sunderland team. So I think Sunderland are going to benefit from having that pre-season that's been really stable. They haven't lost any major players, and I think that will play into their hands. In Labrisse's first season, Sunderland entered that championship campaign having only signed 2 free transfers, and they started that campaign very, very fast, won their first 4 games of the season, and I think that is probably where Sunderland are hoping to benefit this season. I think they will look at the opening fixtures they've got, which are against Ipswich, Fulham and Brentford, and think, right, can we go and get 6 or 7 points from those 3 games and set ourselves up for a good campaign? And that'll be the hope. They don't want to be going in, because they've got Arsenal and Man City after that, they don't want to be going in to the first international break on, say, 3 points. They can't really afford to do that, especially with the Europa League kicking on. So they've got to get off to a good start of the season. And I think therein lies what Sunderland's campaign is going to look like. I think if Sunderland start well and do get a couple of wins in their first 3 games, I think they're probably going to have a pretty steady campaign. But I think if Sunderland do enter that October international break and are sat in the relegation zone, heading into then what's going to be a hugely busy period of European football, it's going to be very difficult for Sunderland, I think, to really sort of solidify themselves in the Premier League and make sure they're not in relegation danger. And I think that is the key point. But are Sunderland, in my view, even though I am a Sunderland fan, but if I was to take that Sunderland fan hat off and look at this as a neutral, do I think Sunderland are in danger of getting relegated? I don't think they are. The quality of the team that Sunderland have is better than the newly promoted teams, and it's also better than quite a few teams in the Premier League right now, shown by them finishing 7th last season. They have still got all the key components of this team there. They haven't lost anyone of particular importance to the squad. So therefore, I think it's almost implausible to think that they'll drop 20 points, which is probably what would need to happen for them to get relegated. If you're going to say it's roughly 35, Sunderland would have to drop 20. They finished with 54 last season. I don't see this team doing that, especially with the quality that they have. A team with Brian Brobby in there, Enzo Lefebvre, Granit Xhaka, Nordi Mukiele, Dan Ballard, Robin Roofs. I don't see that team dropping 20 points, even with the additional games of Europe. And I think Regis Lebris is such a talented coach that he will be able to manage this squad and get them through this period. But Sunderland still need work to do. They've still got to sign some players in. I think they probably need to add... Well, they definitely need to add a left back. They've only got one. They definitely need to add a right winger. They don't currently have a starting right winger. You could definitely make an argument that they need another cover forward player, and you could also make an argument that they possibly need a cover for Granit Xhaka. So there's at least 4 players that I think Sunderland are going to go for from now at the end of the transfer window. It is frustrating as a Sunderland fan that they've not done it yet, but they do need to do that. They do have the money to spend on it, but it's going to be very interesting to see where they go with it. But as I sit here right now, I can't really in good conscience say that I am biased as a Sunderland fan. Obviously factor that in, but I can't say that I can see a reason why this team is suddenly going to drop 20 points in being embroiled in some sort of relegation battle this season. But that's where I am. I'm curious to know what you guys think in the comments. Obviously, I am biased as a Sunderland fan. I've tried to take that bias off. I've tried to explain why people are pointing at Sunderland being potential relegation candidates. I think I've probably fought against that quite a bit. I think Sunderland will regress. I think they will probably finish in lower mid-table, but I don't think they are going to be really in relegation trouble, certainly in the second half of the season. Yes, they might flirt with it in the first half because, the points totals are, you can be on 20 points after 17 games. You are still going to be close to that conversation. But I think as the season wears on, I can't see Sunderland falling into that trap. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you think Sunderland are going to be in relegation danger this season? Do you think they're going to have another good campaign? I'll be curious to see what you guys think. Thanks for watching the video, and we'll catch you again for another one.